So this is part 2 of lecture chapter 4 and chapter 5. So we're on respiration. We actually started it on the beginning of the other part. It's really important, you guys, when you're learning this stuff, that you constantly are comparing them to each other. Back in that background section, did you guys notice the pattern? Did you see how the photosynthesis reaction, that equation, how did it compare to the respiration one? Anybody notice the pattern? Yeah, backwards, reverse, opposites. Okay? So if you know one equation, do you know the other? Yes, the only difference is the type of energy that is included in the equation. Okay? So in photosynthesis, what type of energy was it? Yeah, sunlight or light energy. What type of energy was coming out of respiration? What type of energy? ATP, which is a type of chemical energy. Okay? So cellular respiration is a decomposition pathway. It is not a simple reaction. It takes a lot of different things for the whole reaction to be complete. For example, when we used catalase in the liver and we had that enzyme break down hydrogen peroxide into water and oxygen, that was a really easy reaction. You saw it happen right in front of you. These reactions are so complex, they need a whole organelle to help the reaction occur. The organelle is made of a bunch of different proteins in those membranes, for example, or different enzymes, which are also, there's enzyme proteins even in those membranes inside the organelles. But also in the space, right, that there's the matrix, which is inside the inner membrane of the mitochondria. There's enzymes in there that help this process. The chloroplast, do you remember the name of the space outside the thylakoid membranes? That's the stroma. Again, so my point is this is very complex, and that's why they're going to call it a pathway, not just a simple reaction. Okay? So it is the oxidizing sugars. It's breaking sugar down. That's what cellular respiration is. Some of the energy then is conserved into this ATP molecule. Remember, the ATP is going to be your transfer molecule. It's going to transfer energy. It's the molecule that's going to provide all the energy needed for the work, the things the cell needs to do. Now, this is huge. I pointed this out in photosynthesis, too. The raw materials also, your carbon molecules that are coming from the glucose, which, think about that, let me back up. Those carbon molecules that are coming from the glucose are building blocks for the other carbon molecules you need. The way you get carbon is from eating. What molecule are we talking about? What do we eat? What are we breaking down? The glucose, right? Carbohydrates. That's where we're getting our carbon. And then this huge reaction is what's giving us our ATPs. Okay? So, again, we're going to use that raw material, they're calling it, that carbon. We're talking about carbon dioxide, you guys. You don't exhale all your carbon dioxide that was released. We're going to use the carbon dioxide to make things out of also for those carbon molecules. Okay, 2 vocab words. So, aerobic. Think of aerobics. Kicking, right? You're dancing. You're exercising. Are you breathing? Yeah. So let's memorize that right now. Aerobic are reactions that need what? Oxygen. It's required. It's not an option. If there's no oxygen, these reactions will not occur. Now, anaerobic, when you put A in front of things, okay, that means that it's without. So these reactions don't need what? Oxygen. So that's anaerobic. Now, some of you that are working out or will be working out, or maybe you're even on a team or something, sometimes you do anaerobic training. This would be done during intervals. This could be done during sprinting, or this could be done during very long-term sustained exercising. You do not have enough oxygen to have cellular respiration happening in every one of your cells. We're talking about your muscle cells. So then what happens is the muscles don't die. I know they might feel like you're going to die, and you're probably telling your coach you're going to die, but the cells will switch to an anaerobic process, which is glycolysis, and then fermentation. And you'll make lactic acid. And do you feel the burning in your muscles? That's because your cells are barely getting enough energy for what you're asking them to do. They're just getting a little bit of ATP through this anaerobic pathway. If the cells that are getting enough oxygen, they're going to make a lot more ATP, and then they're being more efficient, and that's through cellular respiration. So then you might be going, well, why would my coach do this to me? Because then your muscles are like, this is not good. The brain upstairs is asking too much for us. Let's divide. Let's make more muscle cells, because the crazy person in charge of us is making us do more than we can do very well. So now did you just get muscle mass increase? Yeah, that's what your coach wants. Because now you can run faster, you can be more efficient. Not just muscle cells also start growing. Blood vessel cells start growing. So now we can get oxygen more efficiently to all the cells. So the body's just pretty amazing on what it can do. Okay, so this is just that overall equation. You already wrote it down. And then, do you remember when we talked about photosynthesis? I said photosynthesis had two main processes. Do you guys remember it? How many? I wanted you to memorize. How many big processes were happening in the huge process of photosynthesis? 2. Was there a cycle? Is there a cycle in this one? How many processes in this one are necessary? 3. Do you guys see the difference? Now, this is important. Glycolysis happens, this is still anaerobic. You don't need oxygen. And it does not have to have a mitochondria. It happens in the chloroplast. The products, which basically is half of a sugar, are what move in to the mitochondria to continue breaking down the sugar. The sugar's big, C6, H12O6. Does glyco sound like glucose? Lysis means to split or to cut. So glycolysis means you are splitting what in half? The glucose, the sugar. Now, you got some energy from that. You got 2 ATPs. That's enough to keep your cell alive. But now if we take those half of sugars into a mitochondria, we're going to get a bunch more ATPs because there's still a lot of energy in those bonds. Okay? Now, it does have a cycle. There's a cycle also in photosynthesis. Does anybody remember the name of that cycle? Good, Calvin. Krebs is the guy, and so is Calvin. These are the guys that figured out these cycles, so they're named after them. However, some scientists call the Krebs, they call it the citric acid cycle. They actually name it after one of the main molecules in it. So if you run into that in the future, it's the same thing. Okay, both of them also have an electron transport system. This is a huge complex that goes across the membranes. So again, they're very similar. So I just talked about all that with the glycolysis. But with the Krebs cycle, what we're doing here is we're releasing carbon dioxide. It also will make a little bit of ATP, but where we get a bunch of the ATP is across the inner membrane. It's called the electron transport system. In next class, before the vocab quiz, I will show you guys some awesome animations that will show you how this works. And again, we're making tons of ATP, and this is where the oxygen is really, really necessary. Okay, a little bit more on the anaerobic pathway. If there is no oxygen, you're burning muscles, for example. If there's no oxygen, we just do glycolysis. We split the sugar in half, we get a couple ATPs. To keep glycolysis going, another reaction has to happen that's called fermentation. And again, I'll show you that a little bit more. And you also can feel lactic acid. So you got a big workout the day before, and sometimes if it's a really big workout, it'll last for more than 1 or 2 days when you're sore. The stiffness is because of the buildup of the lactic acid also. It's taking up space, and it's making your muscles stiff. And your body will get rid of all that waste product. Okay, a little bit about bacteria, and I had a question a little bit earlier about this. I don't really care about the second bullet. I kind of just put it there as enrichment, but I do care about the first bullet. So bacteria are prokaryotic cells. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have mitochondria. They don't have all these organelles. So their cell membrane, besides regulating what comes in and out, they'll have areas in their cell membrane that are doing whatever they need to do. If they're photosynthetic bacteria, it'll be like the thylakoid membrane. They will, and then they'll have to have areas for cellular respiration because every life has to have that. So then parts of their cell membrane will do cellular respiration. Almost done. You guys are doing great. Okay, so since we're talking about anaerobic and aerobic, I want to tell you that these bacteria, because oxygen came later. Oxygen came on Earth because of photosynthetic bacteria that evolved. Before then, we didn't have much oxygen. So we still today have a lot of bacteria that can't be around oxygen. They're deep, deep in mud, the bottoms of the oceans, because they evolved at a time where there was no oxygen. And oxygen is very reactive. You guys know that. You need oxygen to burn things, right, to combust. Oxygen is a free radical. It'll hurt us at times. It's because it's so reactive. But we have adapted to fight it, and we take advantage of it. It's useful to us. So if they're obligate anaerobes, oxygen is poisonous to them. Like, they're obligated not to be around oxygen. If they're facultative aerobes, it doesn't matter. And some of them are amazing. Some of them can switch back and forth, like your muscle cells. Then most organisms, animals and plants and things that are very dominant right now on today's Earth, are obligate aerobes, which means they have to have oxygen. You guys with me? Okay. Now, you do not need to memorize this. Somebody asked this, but I want you to be able to kind of evaluate this. So, glycolysis makes 2 ATP. The Krebs cycle makes 2 ATP. But right here, ETS, electron transport system, we have 18 plus 4, and we also get more here from the other things when there's oxygen present. So the main takeaway is that you understand that ATP is made in the Krebs cycle a small amount. Glycolysis makes ATP also a small amount. But in the mitochondria, through the membrane, do we get a lot of ATPs compared? Yes. And that's all from one glucose. Okay, so then to try and pull it together here. Without oxygen, cells must ferment. That's the fermentation. And bacteria do this, and yeast do this also. They do an alcoholic fermentation. And we'll talk more about that too. They don't do a lactic acid fermentation, but it does the same thing. They just have it slightly different. And this is how we make alcohol. This is how you get bread to rise. This is how you make cheese. So we'll talk more about that. When oxygen is present though, the organisms gain much more energy from their food with the presence of oxygen because they could do cellular respiration. Okay, so last one, the big picture here. The products of photosynthesis are the reactants of what? Cellular respiration. The products of cellular respiration are the reactants of photosynthesis. Okay, and you guys know this, you just maybe aren't thinking about it in these types of terms. Okay? All right, so you survived your lecture.